Okay, we're into an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff to have a really cool production follow-up for you guys from the brand Prometheus. A little about them. They're founded back in 2008, and they're a micro brand with a vintage kind of 60s and 70s aesthetic, focusing on evolving design classics of the past, while really taking advantage of today's modern manufacturing improvements. They are a sister brand to the popular Borealis watch company, and from time to time they send in review pieces, and recently they sent in the actual prototype for this, so I previewed it, and it's always nice to get a follow-up and check out the actual production unit and see some of the changes and improvements. And this is definitely a fun one, just a little bit different. I would say that it does fall underneath the category of a dive watch. Some key common characteristics and if you're looking for a diver, of course you're going to want water resistance with some type of screw down crown. You're going to something that's tough, that's legible, maybe with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is definitely outside of that typical diver mold. This is their Jamanta, and this is the non-prototype full production version, and it's a really cool kind of fusion of style and performance. It's a diver that, it's really well crafted, and I think it's really nice that it is something that is kind of an adventure watch that just happens to have a good amount of water resistance. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, so one thing that has to be mentioned is that there's quite a bit of body in this bracelet. As you can see, it doesn't lay flat. So it's going to have a little bit of that there. So you can see articulation, not the most articulated style, but I think that goes with the aesthetic. It definitely has that kind of overbuilt, very tough look. Think, if Panerai wanted to make a modern watch, it probably would look something like this in terms of its aesthetic, the overbuilt nature, and just the overall kind of ruggedly handsome good looks. Now, in terms of the size range on here, it's actually a 42 millimeter diameter. So in terms of a dive watch, that's pretty standard, but you're going to see that it does have a slightly larger dial opening thanks to the lack of a rotating bezel. So you are going to get that larger dial real estate, but not oversized, because you do still have a nice kind of chapter ring there to help kind of squeeze things towards the center. And then you do have, of course, those nice applied indices that are placed. I really like the color play on here with the white and the blue. It's only 12.3 millimeters thick, so that's not too shabby. I know probably just looking at it, it doesn't, scream out as something that's inherently thin. But you also have to remember that this is a larger watch at 42 millimeters, so that thickness is actually spread really nicely, and it does feel, to me anyway, to my wrist, it does feel relatively thin. It has a 50 millimeter lug to lug. Stainless steel, 3116L, of course, brushed and polished. You're going to see a lot of different finishing there. So a lot of nice little details for those of you who appreciate those little ornate details. I think there's going to be a lot to enjoy here. Check out that transitioning between brushed and polished. Very nice. Everything flows, very cohesive design. And, a lot of times within the dive watch space specifically, there's so many derivative watches, even from brands originally, right? There's a lot of reissues. Some of the best watches are reissues. So it is still nice to get a kind of a fresh injection of something that just feels modern, feels very different, and feels very fresh. Now, the bezel is fixed, but it does have these little notches in it, which are really cool, and it kind of carries over the 12-hour marking. So it just gives you a little extra, reference point there, which is nice. The crown is screw down, and it is nicely protected by these crown guards that are very nice and sharp in terms of their execution. Not sharp to the touch or anything, but I do like the way they did that. They look kind of bolted on. Again, it adds to that just overbuilt nature. And then inside, although you can't see it, it does have a Miyota 9039, which is a no date movement, which means there's going to be no ghost position on the crown there, which is a screw down crown that is nicely signed. Now getting into the dial, you of course see that horizontal plank dial. It's not, at least not in this particular model and with the white, it doesn't stand out as much, but I kind of like that. It's like subtle, you know, the more you look at it, the more you notice it, because I think the colorway alone gives you enough kind of visual interest. And then you just have this other layer in terms of the texture there with the plank, you know, horizontal striping that, you know, just comes in when you want to see it, right? When you take a closer look, or depending on the angle of the light that you're looking at it in. You do have these really nicely, check out those hands. I love a good set of blued, thermally blued hands, especially over brushing, just because it adds just so much texture and vibrance to the handset. Very cool. Then you're getting, of course, Swiss made Superluminova BGW9 and 30 atmospheres or 300 meters of water resistance, 22 millimeter lug width, which is quite proportional for this type of watch. And then you're getting, you know, everything is solid in terms of this H-Link bracelet. It's going to taper from 22 down to 20 millimeters. And check this out, a new clasp. So this wasn't the one that they showed. This is actually, you know, kind of in the Christopher Ward style, where you do have the clasp, you know, where the piece underneath, you can pull that out and then you can ratchet click it back down a few clicks, and then you can really just dial in your fitment from there. So very cool. And you can see, let me just give it a quick wipe here. Very nice in terms of that finish again, and it all ties together. I think it has a nice flow to it. All together, that just looks really cool. So I dig that. It's again, it's different. I don't think it's for everybody. This is definitely, with like most micro brands, these are never really meant to be one and done type watches. These are meant to be watches that are part of a collection of other diverse designs. And yeah, this is definitely one that stands on its own. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this wears actually really well. Again, I think proportionally, although it is a larger scale, proportions wise, they really nail it. It just wraps around the wrist, lays really nicely. It has that low stance, that low center of gravity, and it has a whole lot of wrist presence. Of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens there, you're going to get a bit of perspective distortion. It's going to seem larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is just keep my wrist nice and low here, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can still get a more detailed look, you know, while just having a bit of a truer aspect ratio of how this may lay on your own wrist. And although I do have a larger than average wrist at 7.5 inches, I will say that it is quite round, as you can see there. So it's not like it's just flat and wide and just super accommodating to any type of watch. So I am very conscious in terms of, you know, what does fit well and lay well. And although this, of course, is meant to wear larger, and wear more full size, I would say it is not quite oversized. It has a nice bit of presence to it, and again, you know, depending on, you know, your style and your attire and everything will kind of dictate how this might flow, you know, on your own wrist. But I do think it's definitely doable, especially for somebody with a larger wrist. And even if you do have a smaller wrist, if you're into this style, then you absolutely, you know, can probably pull something like this off. Again, at 50 millimeters lug to lug. If you know that's kind of a no-no for you, then, you know, and you got to stay at 47 millimeters or under, that can be an issue. But in terms of width wise, you know, don't be too discouraged on that side. You know, obviously the length of how it will sit on top of your wrist, you don't want to have a bunch of overhang. That's completely understandable. But when it comes to the design of watches and how they sit, you know, you can definitely always go a bit wider than you might think, especially when you have something that is proportioned so nicely, like you'll see here. Look at those hands just coming to life. Very, very cool. But with all that said, let's go ahead, get this off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, as you can see, yes, this is a dive watch. So it's going to give you some really beautiful piercing lume. And for somebody that's just looking for, let's say, an everyday kind of adventure watch, feels overbuilt and very rugged and tough, but still has a nice little bit of refinement in terms of its styling. Again, this is going to really fit kind of that use case. But one thing I always like to work in is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in a field enjoying direct sunlight. Oh, man, look at that lume. Beautiful contrast against the white dial, the heat bluing there. Oh. Yeah, you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. Sometimes you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. So maybe include a bit of harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is some really nice uniform brushing, really showing it the way that it holds the light there. Really, really clean. Very, very nice. And then, of course, there's a nice deep luster for some of those high polished little details there. So very nice. Very handsome. I'm really digging this one in the transitional lighting. And that's, you know, I've been on a bit of a white dial kick as of late. There's just so much play that can kind of happen on a white dial. And then this one in particular, you can see you really just appreciate the white dial. And then depending on the lighting, then you can see kind of that plank texture, or just kind of show you just enough there. Very, very nice. And then, of course, a lot of great colors kind of playing off of this piece. Just really, really beautiful, guys. I'm digging this one. Again, very different. Not your typical dive watch, not your typical wrist watch. But for me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist. Hefty, but still low slung, and features that nice wrist wrap, right? Which is always going to be important regardless of the size of the watch. In terms of model variants, definitely check the site links for current availability and all the different options. Comparable models, you know, while the rest of the kind of under $500 micro brand, did I mention this? You can buy this for $415. That's pretty killer. And again, let's rewind now. I should say fast forward back to where we were though. The rest of the kind of under $500 micro brand diver space definitely feels very oversaturated with vintage homage watches, right? A lot of big crowns, a lot of kind of anywhere from you know, kind of that mid-century up until the 70s, 80s, and now even 90s kind of neo-vintage designs. So it's nice to see a thoroughly modern and original feeling option, you know, from a brand that we know specializes in dive watches. This isn't something that they're doing on the side. They're not creating a dive watch to be, you know, to have a more complete product line. They've been producing dive watches, again, since 2008, which is, you know, in the year 2024. That's quite a long time. So, you know, you don't necessarily need to worry about having too small of a sample size in terms of quality or in terms of, you know, customer service or, you know, your kind of purchase experience. There's definitely a lot of other folks within this community that know about Prometheus, know about Borealis, and can absolutely vouch for the quality and value proposition of their products. So for me, guys, the final word on these, yes, I totally understand these aren't going to be for everyone, but the Jamanta Diver, I think it'll delight those that are looking for something more offbeat without sacrificing build quality, right? Like a lot of times you can see stuff, it's a little bit more niche, it's a little bit more playful, but then it also kind of, it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Here, you're getting a pretty well-refined piece, you know, with a very dynamic design. So I don't know, I dig that. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.